Right.
Marshall, and I've always thought private property, it belongs to individuals, to families, not the government. And the government should not take excessive amounts of money for itself and tax and regulate and control families. In other words, to lay heavy tax and regulation and control upon free citizens, families that are hardworking families, goes against the laws of nature and nature's God. The law of God condemns it. And really, no law, like you said, but that of a tyrant, really can deserve it. So, for example, inheritance taxes, it's really a Marxist idea. And, it's a part of...
Oh, it's income tax.
Yeah, it's really...
Right. But when you tax a man's income, you tax his very being, the creativity of his body. And when you do so, you make him frustrated, you destroy his creativity, and in so doing, destroy his ability to feed and care for his family. And the Bible says, he that does not take care of his own is worse than an infidel.
And exactly, and I think it's unfortunately become part of our civil government's plan. It's a bad plan to exert ungodly dominion, because the plan subverts the covenant that we're talking about by redistributing wealth from covenant keepers to covenant breakers. In other words, socialism in itself is not chiefly about redistribution of wealth from the haves to the have-nots. It's about the redistribution of power from families to the government, to the state government. And
absolutely,
I think, like you said, it's a ploy of the state to monopolize dominion, responsibility of the family. You just said it, that the state becomes the new family.
The state is playing God in the lives of the American people. And to tell you the truth, and your listeners should know this, that the people have come to like it. In fact, they like it so much that when we have a $14 trillion debt, the average American says, we want to cut back on the debt, but I don't want to lose any of my bennies. You will not take away any of my Social Security. You will not take care of any of my health care benefits. I am going to get it all, but I want you to cut the debt. We can't have it. See, we've wanted the bennies so badly now that we've become government service junkies instead of worshipers of God.
Well, Alexei de Tocqueville said that, didn't he? He said that America would last until it discovered that it could vote largesse, liberal taking for itself from the public treasury. And boy, oh boy, have we discovered that with a vengeance.
Exactly. We all wanted to have our kids. What is the public school? Let's be realistic. The public school is not necessarily a biblical answer. It certainly wasn't considered so by our founding fathers all the way through. Education was always a private thing. And then when we began to grow as a civilization in the cities, people said, well, wait a minute. If we have public schools, then we can get other people to help us with the cost of this education. And then we have a permanent babysitter from 8 in the morning until 4 at night, 4 in the afternoon. Well, who wants to give up a permanent babysitter, even though it's enslaving your children and it's costing you more than you think? The point is that people got so used to it that they forgot that what was being taught there and the very idea that someone else would pay for the education of your children is theft. You can't steal from somebody else who's rich down the road, who's got a bigger house than you do, and he's paying $100,000 in property tax. It's not your right to stick a gun to his head and take his money to educate your kids. That's biblically wrong. That's called theft. And yet today we call it the graduated income tax. Graduated income tax is destroying the family.
Yep. I always like to look at, I read a lot on the Founding Fathers, and it's interesting. There's only 3 areas they gave us in the federal Constitution that we were to draw money out of the populace, and it was 1, the general defense and protection of the land, 2 was the general maintenance of the laws, and 3 was, in certain unique instances, there could be a common service type of project. And their logic was so perfect in the sense that they knew, because they saw what happened during the War of 1776, that nobody in their right mind would invest in a tank with a crew and fuel. There's no return on that investment. So they knew, though, we needed to have some protection so our civil liberties would be protected. So they said, the American people, you're going to have to fund some general funds to protect the nation, because nobody in their right mind would invest in such a thing. It's a bad investment. Two, they saw what happened in the Massachusetts colony, I believe, or Pennsylvania, where the king had sent a magistrate and no one would even buy him inks, quill, and pen, because there is no return on a politician. There's none unless you're bribing him, which is wrong. So they said, no, we're going to have some funding to maintain the general government. And three, they knew as a general rule nobody would ever build a highway from Minnesota down to Texas, because there'd be parts of the highway that would have some needs in the bigger sense that no one would pay for. So they said, well, if you're building something that really benefits everybody, the federal government can help a little bit. In other words, government never produces anything. It absorbs it, uses it up, and you have no return on your investment. That's why when government grows, you send $1 in, you get a nickel back. They all understood this. And when we get taxed like we do for government programs that a small group wants, we are just seeing our money used poorly, that the private sector would have seen a need, capitalized on that need, and provided a service at a much more efficient and useful means. The founders understood this. So they said what we would have to pay for, which was very limited, we've now expanded it into innumerable areas, everything from farm subsidies to daycare to government education. It just goes on. And if you ever notice, there's really no return on investment in any of those things.
Well, that's right. The state originally, the government was only to seize originally enough money from families to provide them protection from the external evil.
Right.
That's what they're supposed to do, right, Marshall?
Exactly. And the history of nations is clear on this. There's never been an exception. That men will either be ruled by a power without them or a power within them, either by the strong arm of men or by the strong will of God, either by the Bible or the bayonet. Think about that. People that are in your audience, the people are either going to be voluntarily ruled by what the Bible says and what God says, and as a result, develop self-governing families that are not government-dependent, or we are going to be ruled by the bayonet. There is no example in history of that not happening. Look at every nation in the world that has not been influenced strongly by the Bible, and they are under totalitarian government. Their people are terrible in terms of their own character, and they rape and pillage. Look what's going on in the Middle East. It's riot and revolution with no success. They can't bring liberty without having self-governing, monogamous Christian family.
I heard
and I don't mean to be paternalistic here. I'm not talking about Christian denominations. I'm saying that the biblical principles upon which the world is raised, which actually is the only way the world works, these principles related to the family are the foundation for America. America was the most unique nation in the history of the world since ancient Israel, and the reason it was is because instead of being founded by conquistadores, like South America was, or like the Caribbean was, instead of being founded by Alexander the Great and his men without women that raped and pillaged the nations of the world, and he set up 70 cities in his own name and declared himself God, instead of that, the Pilgrims came across with 102 people.
That's
and
right.
A few families. And they died, half of them the first winter, but they lived this godly covenantal life in which God blessed them. And William Bradford said this one statement. He said, "We have come here as families to propagate the gospel of Christ to the remotest parts of the world. Yea, that we could be but stepping stones for the promotion of so great a work." That is the family generational living that Dan is talking about, that you live out, John. I know your family, that you are living generationally. You're not living for yourself. You're living for the future. And the projects we're working on together, including Monumental, the movie, and all these various things, are not for ourselves, but for the future. We've got to lay our lives down like the Pilgrims did and put our face down in the mud and blow bubbles so that our children can walk on our back. That's where true liberty is going to be birthed for the future.
Okay, we're going to break away for 1 minute. We'll be back with Dr. Marshall Foster and Dan Williamson with the story.